beginning here. In the first two books, we have a lot of opinions about this question of justice, okay? And the dialogue starts out, it's important to realize this, it's important to notice this. In a particular place, with particular people, okay? The scenario, the way that it starts out is significant. Everything that Plato puts into this book has some sort of significance. There's no like superfluous details. And you have to ask yourself, well, why did he do it this way? Okay? So what we have is Socrates is deciding he wants to go attend a festival, and he's on his way, right? And his friend Paulo Marcos stops him. And you may notice that the spelling that I have here is a little bit different from what's in your book, and actually there's like 3 or 4 or 5 different spellings of these names, because they're, of course, in the original ancient Greek, people have actually transliterated them differently. Like some people use K for the CH there, or E for the Y, but there's no standard spelling. So his friend Paulo Marcos stops him, and he wants Socrates to not go right away, but to stay and talk to him and his friends. Okay, this should sound familiar because if you remember from the Gorgias, something similar happened there, right? So it's almost like, you know, Socrates is bent on doing the traditional thing, which isn't really like him, and he gets waylaid, and people want to hear from him. And so we have this insistence that he stop, where Paulo Marcos says, "It looks to me, Socrates, as if you two are starting off for Athens." "It looks that way. If it looks that way, it is then," I said. "Do you see how many we are?" he said. "I do." "Well, you must either prove stronger than we are, or you will have to stay here." Okay? So Glaucon is Socrates' friend. Anyway, they're together. And now we have Paulo Marcos saying, "You know what? Me and my group, we're strong. We've got more people than you do. So it looks like you're going to have to stay because that's what we want." Okay. Now, what's the significance of that, do you think? I mean, when you think about it, what is Plato trying to get across there? What's he want you to think about?
Is he kind of alluding to Paulo Marcos's later thought that might means right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this reflects Paulo Marcos's worldview and a lot of people's worldview, and not only that, but an actual reality of life, which is that lots of times when whichever party has the greatest numbers or the greatest firepower, they can overwhelm the other side, even though if the other side is intelligent or makes more sense or not. Okay, it doesn't matter. Okay, numbers can win if they're presented like this. You know, we have more guys than you do. So now this is a little bit of a joke. Would they really like kidnap them? And no, of course not. All right. So it's said in a sort of tongue-in-cheek way, but it's there for a reason, because that's one of the oppositions that continues to come up in this dialogue, is the opposition between might and right, the opposition between physical power and justice. Okay, runs throughout this dialogue, and it's a huge political reality that, you know, good ideas can be great, they can be right and so forth, but in the end, if enough people won't accept them and want to do something else, then that's what's going to happen. So obviously, you know, Socrates actually would much rather have a dialogue than go to the festival, so I don't think he's doing this unwillingly. And they go back to Paulo Marcos's house. So that's how this whole thing starts. All right, now, then again we have this. When they get to the house, he meets Cephalus, Paulo Marcos's father. Cephalus is an old man, okay? And there's a very curious exchange that goes on here about Cephalus's experiences. Now, Socrates wants to know from a guy like to be old, okay? Is it good? Is it bad? You know, are there any benefits? What are the drawbacks, and so forth? Okay, so he actually asks him, which would that be considered kind of rude by today's standards? Yeah, you know, most of us would not like to be asked. So, what's it like? Like if somebody came, I'm in my middle years, you know, so what's it like to be middle-aged? I'd be like, who told you I was middle-aged? So, so you know, but back then, I don't know, probably Keith Willis would be proud of the fact that he lived as long as he had, and especially men, old men, you know, were considered to know a lot. They were a fount of wisdom. People were supposed to listen to what they say, you know. So Keith Willis might not have been insulted by that. And here's what he says, all right? Let's think about this. In response to Socrates' question, he goes into how young men get caught up in sex and drinking and, you know, basically the passions of life, and they don't settle down. They can't think as well as when they're older. Okay? He says, the majority complain about the lost pleasures they remember from their youth. Okay? He's talking here about the older folks that he's around. He says the majority of them complain about those lost pleasures and the other things that go along with them, and they get angry as if they've been deprived of important things and have lived well then but are not hardly living now. Okay? Some others moan about how the abuse heaped on old people by their relatives. Because of this, they repeat over and over again that old age is the cause of many evils. But I don't think they blame the real cause, Socrates. For if old age were really the cause, I should have suffered in the same way, and so should everyone else of my age. But as it is, I've met some who don't feel like that in the least. Okay? Now, if you know many old people, you know this is a real concrete, practical description of their attitudes. Okay? Some of them complain a lot about being old. And, you know, they hark back to their youth. Oh, you know, I used to be able to climb, you know, mountains, and I used to be able to dance, and, you know, I used to be able to have a couple of drinks and not get sick or whatever. And now I can't do any of those things. Old age is hell, you know. And then there are other people, I don't know if they'd go so far as Keith Willis, but they're more comfortable with old age. They can see some benefits. They say, oh, I've learned a lot, you know, now I kind of know more than I did when I was young. Well, Keith Willis falls into this latter, more happy category. He says, but as it is, I've met some who don't feel like that in the least. Indeed, I was once present when someone asked the poet Sophocles, how are you as far as sex goes, Sophocles? Can you still make love with a woman? Quiet man, the poet replied. I am very glad to have escaped from all that, like a slave who has escaped from a savage and tyrannical master. I thought at that time he was right, and I still do, for old age brings peace and freedom from all such things. Okay? Now, I've never heard an old person say that, okay? I think most of them would probably still like to do that, so I wouldn't go that far. But so he continues, he says, when the appetites relax and cease to importune us, everything Sophocles said comes to pass, and we escape from many mad masters, like the, you know, the drinking and all that as well. In these matters and in those concerning relatives, the real cause isn't old age, but the way people live. If they're moderate and contented, old age too is only moderately onerous. If they aren't, both age and youth are hard to bear. Okay. So what's Keith Willis really saying here about what he sees as the benefits of old age? What's the benefit of being old from his perspective?
Is it that you come to appreciate everything more as you like had all these experiences? You can appreciate them more as you grow.
There's that. You know, he's definitely exuding a sort of wisdom here. He's had a lot of experiences, and he's decided which ones are more valuable and less valuable.
That you're kind of free from a lot of the slavery of like the food, sex, and all the vices that you would have to deal with.
Yeah, and that's interesting, you know, because he admits that other people don't agree with him. You know, old people are split, so to speak, on this issue, right? But from his perspective, he's actually freer because he doesn't have all of these things always knocking on his door all the time, okay? So, you know, again, I don't know how realistic that is to be very happy about it, but I do think a lot of old people turn to other things that they didn't do and think about earlier because they can't do other certain things. They actually spend more time with friends, they engage in discussion groups, they go to, you know, events that they you know, there's a lot of things. My parents do a lot of volunteer work they couldn't do earlier in their lives. They were too busy working, trying to make money and so forth, okay? So there's some truth to that. And yeah, this is about another theme that goes throughout this dialogue, the opposition between passions and reason. And Plato really does reflect the view that passions just block reason. Okay, now that's a view that isn't universally accepted. Even Aristotle disagreed with this. You know, he said, look, he disliked Plato's dualism, that Plato definitely thought you have the soul and the body, and the soul is vastly superior to the body, and the things of the body kind of drag the soul down. So in order for a person to be rational and just, they have to disregard the things of the body pretty much. They have to really put those under control to be able to think well and to really truly be happy at whatever age. And Aristotle said, no, you know, the body and the mind are very much intertwined. It's impossible, and it's a distortion of a person to separate those two. It's really impossible. Yes, you do have to practice moderation and self-control, but these things aren't bad. You know, Plato gets a lot of criticism for starting the theme that the things of the body are somehow bad, okay? And Aristotle disagreed with that because those things are also what produce families and communities and so forth, okay? But anyway, definitely we see in the Republic this opposition between passion and reason. And reason must develop to the exclusion of passion. Okay. All right. Another point that Willis makes is that he's rich, and that's nice. You know, one of the benefits of living as long as he has and being as smart as he is that he's made a lot of money. And at this point in time, he has enough money to be able to do what he wants to do freely, right? So I'm sure that he paid for everything that's going on there today with the food and the beverages and so forth. And he says that he can be a better person, a more just person, because he's wealthy. Because he says, I don't have to worry about paying my debts, for instance. If I owe somebody something, I have enough money, I don't really have to think about it, I just pay my debts, okay? And actually, he ends up saying that justice for him, his definition of justice, which is what they get into in this question of justice, what is it really? Willis's definition of justice is that a person should pay his debts, and I don't think it just means money debts, but that's a big part of it, okay? Paying your debts and telling the truth. And he says both of those things are pretty easy for me because I'm wealthy, I'm established, don't really need to. I've lived my life, you know, fairly transparently. You know, I followed the rules, and because of that, you know, it's not hard for me to tell the truth, and it's not hard for me to pay my debt. So I'm a very fortunate man. Okay? Is it true? Is his reasoning correct that if you have more money, it's easier to be a just and good person? What do you think? Yeah.
Well, with that much money, it kind of opens up more doors where you could actually become more unjust. I mean, if you look at rulers of past days, once they get the power, you tend to see more corruption. I mean, he does talk about how if you had the money to begin with, you inherited it. The unjust wouldn't happen as easily because you're not trying to hold on to the money and just increase that money and power. You're more just you're not worried about it. But if you create your own money, then you're a little more worried about it. And I think that's where the injustice would come from.
That's a great point. Yeah, you just expressed the aristocratic point of view about money pretty well. You know, if you inherit your money, you haven't had to grab and strive for it. You sort of feel like you need to preserve it, and you're kind of the caretaker of your estate, so to speak, but you don't have that, you know, sort of money-grubbing aspect, right, which means that you're less tempted, supposedly, to do wrong in the pursuit of money. Yeah.
I would definitely agree with that. It feels like, in a way, with money, it's just like different kind of temptations or different ways to be unjust and without money. And it seems almost like you even have, you know, more opportunity to be unjust than if you don't have money, because if you're poor and you do unjust things like steal food, it's not because you're just wanting to hurt somebody, it's because you're trying to preserve your life and preserve your family's life. But if you're rich and you cheat someone out of their money, you really don't have any, I guess, underlying good reason for doing that. You're just doing it because you're selfish. So it's like, it's just different ways.
Yeah, if you're poor, you're stealing out of necessity, so to speak, right? And if you're wealthy and you're just trying to build up more, it seems like it would be more blameable, right? Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think being just like transcends, I would think, circumstance. So I think if you said like circumstance makes it easier to be just, I think like the definition of why I think to be just, like it's like character, like past just, like past, circumstance. Like I wouldn't say you're just because you have enough money, it's easier for you to do what's right. I think it's more than that. I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that, more than that is a good way to put it. He might have a point, but only if he's already a just person, right? Then he would do what's right with his money, and it would be easier.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think a just person is going to be just with or without money, and an unjust person will be unjust with or without money. Just like she was saying with the person who steals to survive, they're just as unjust as somebody who steals to continue surviving and thriving even more. I mean, either way, the person with or without money is doing something unjust.
So it's pointing to something more fundamental than what Keithless is saying. Yeah, did you want to?
Good. Yeah, I think you got it.
Okay. Well, I think you're on the right track there as far as what Socrates' response is to this. It's a little too simple, And he would agree with several of you who said that when you have money and power, you do have more temptations. Not that a wealthy or powerful person couldn't be just, but it's actually a bit harder because they've got more ability to be unjust. So he's wary of that, but more fundamentally, he thinks that there's something when it comes to justice, and Keithless has given us a sort of traditional couple of rules that he probably taught his sons, but those rules don't really get down to the brass tacks. You have to have a just character first, and then if you get wealthy and you retain that character, you will do what's right with your money, but you have to have that just character first. So he questions him this way, and this is something Keithless doesn't like, okay? Because Keithless says that he's a traditional, fairly simple person. He's lived his life, he feels real honestly, and he's done what is expected of him, but he clearly hasn't spent a lot of time in debates about these things, okay? So when Socrates asks him about this, what if you owed a person a weapon that you borrowed from that person, but he comes to collect it, let's say, in the middle of the night and enraged at his wife, okay? Or you can think of any other similar scenario, okay? You borrowed a gun to go target, practice target shooting, and you're going to give it back, but your buddy that you borrowed it from comes and he's enraged at somebody, and maybe drunk, and he's knocking on your door, give me my gun back, okay? If you follow Keithless's rule to the letter, what do? You just give it back because that's the rule. But if you use your judgment about what's good for your friend, what do? You definitely keep it, maybe for a long time, right? Maybe even give it to the police rather than giving it back to him. So this points to the fact that you have to use more judgment, that there's some higher level of understanding of justice necessary to really make a decision. Should I pay my debt or not? Same thing goes with the rule about telling the truth that Keithless has. Are there times when it would be a bad idea, unjust, to tell the truth? Can you think of a case where it would be actually better to tell a lie?
If you're a POW, I guess, and you think it's morally right, whatever fight you're fighting for, so you want to tell the truth, I guess.
Right. If you're trying to escape and you've got a plan to escape with you and some other people, and the guard asks you, what have you been doing today? You don't tell them the truth, right? If you believe that it would be better, morally better, for you to be free and escape than to stay there, right? There are plenty of cases, actually. Now, parents always tell their kids, tell the truth, okay? But as time goes by, we do learn, even when we have a very strong moral teaching from our family, that there's something more at play there than just the rule, tell the truth, right? Okay? If somebody's being pursued by an angry enemy, who's bound to kill them or bound to, he wants to abuse them or whatever, you don't tell them where they are. That would be bad. That would be wrong. So, again, pointing to a higher level of knowledge. And Kephalus does not particularly go for this, okay, in that he's a little disturbed. Now, this may be not because he disagrees with Socrates. I think the first gut level response to Kephalus is, well, he's too simple, he doesn't really understand. But Arnhart raises the possibility that Kephalus is well aware that there are exceptions to the rule, but he doesn't think it's a very good idea to discuss them at length. In other words, we all know there are exceptions, but if you discuss them, then you encourage people who maybe aren't ready to make those decisions to lie, to not pay their debts, and to make up excuses for doing so. Okay? So possibly Kephalus just has a different point of view about what should be discussed. Okay? Socrates thinks everything should be discussed.
Well, wouldn't that be more of like the realist view versus the idealist view?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Kephalus being the realist, because he thinks that what will people do with this knowledge? They're usually not too bright. They're usually passionate. They're usually selfish. So they might just use this as a reason for doing what they want to do. So yes, it really is like the difference between realism and idealism. Okay? Now, it's sort of like this question here that we often ask ourselves, especially with children, okay? Are there some things that we just shouldn't talk about because they're just not ready to handle it, okay? And that is not only a realist question, but a conservative question, okay? We're not going to learn much about conservatism in this class, but that's a conservative position, a classically conservative position, that you have to be careful with what knowledge you level, on people. You have to ask yourself, are they ready for it? And what are they going to do with it? Okay? Where we get into trouble is with, whether this is ever a good idea for adults, right? Should we keep certain things from adults? And even Socrates in the Republic comes around to basically saying his own system won't work if we tell the absolute truth to everybody. He develops this noble lie, the sort of mythology that he will tell people so that they will adhere to the rules. All right. So here's an interesting question to just ask yourself. Is the fact that Socrates wants to question the existing notions of justice an example of Socrates corrupting the youth? Probably Kephalus would say yes. And maybe it's not a good idea. Socrates starts a tradition of questioning everything in the Western philosophic tradition, questioning everything, including religious truths, including moral values, everything. And one could argue that that starts the process where we end up with postmodernism, complete relativism, questioning of science, morality, and religion. Now, whether you like that or not depends on whether you like where it started, I guess. All right, so I hope I'm not going too fast here. I'll kind of tell you what, I'll kind of do this.
But Socrates wouldn't have been considered himself like postmodern, though, would he? Because he
No.
was an absolute.
No, he would not at all. No, he may have started the process of questioning, but he very firmly believed that the use of reason would lead to knowledge of the truth. He believed in absolute truth, so thank you for asking that. He thought we would arrive at the truth, and it was not relative. to, place, time, etc. But that constant questioning, some would argue, is what eventually leads to postmodernism, because the more you question and the more arguments you make, the more everything seems to be a matter of some doubt. Not necessarily, but yeah. All right, so we have Keithlis's point of view. Now we move to the son, Paulo Marcos. And he's a little different. He's also kind of basic. I kind of like his way of thinking in a way, because it works a lot of the time. But he gives the opinion of a poet named Simonides, who said that justice is doing right by your friends, helping your friends, and harming your enemies. Why? Because they're your friends and your enemies. Because, your friends do you good and your enemies do you harm, so you do it back. Okay? And thereby encourage your friends to help you and discourage your enemies. Right? Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? in a sort of basic way, I remember when my son was in grade school and he asked me, well, how do you deal with bullies and how do you deal with obnoxious people? And my answer to him was, if somebody hits you, then you hit them back. I'm sorry if that offends anybody. But if they don't hit you and they just bother you, bother them back. I said, the way people operate is when they bother you, if you give them any static back, they go looking for somebody else to bother. So make them pay. Okay? Because in the child's world, it worked. He was never bullied. He was never bullied, and he never got into a fist. Well, he got into one fight, but that's pretty good. Hasn't been in a fight for years and years, but he always made people pay some sort of price. And it works because in the child's world in particular, that's really the case. The child gets any sort of feedback and they go, maybe not this guy. Maybe somebody's prickly. I used to tell him when he was like 5 or 6, be prickly. You're a prickly cactus, okay, to people like that, and they'll leave you alone. And it worked, okay? But of course, as time went by, I had to teach him other things, or else he would have been not the type of person that I wanted him to be, right? So is Paulo Marcos' view flawed in some way, and if so, how? What's wrong with it? Yeah.
Well, just because someone's your friend, doing something good for them might not always be what justice is. Like if your friend runs somebody over, are you gonna help them bury the body? That's not a just thing to do.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
It should really be based on just, whatever you do good for somebody that you like and do that to somebody that you don't like, needs to be boundaries.
There's still a higher standard, isn't there, that we tend to think, no, that was a great example. The mafia mentality is, I'm going to help you bury the body, right, because you're with me, right? But we don't tend to want to teach people that. Yeah.
I don't know, I feel like sometimes, especially like when you just met someone, the line between being a friend or being an enemy can get blurred. Maybe you think that they're your friend, you really feel that, but they're actually not. They're trying to turn the back on you or stab you in the back with something.
Yeah, that's right. Excellent. You may not know if that really is a friend, because a friend, in Socrates' definition anyway, is somebody who does no harm to you. Certainly if he's killed somebody and wants you to help with the crime, he's doing harm to you, to your soul. He's putting you in danger of being caught, too. Yeah.
I just don't know where he got this from, because they all believe in objective morality.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't see how, and it's so subjective whether you like somebody or not.
I don't think they all believe in objective morality. I think that's the issue here, is that even Paulo Marcos doesn't. And as we go to Thrasymachus and then to Glaucon and Adeimantus, they reflect more of that relativistic point of view. This is really simple. Basically, he's saying, whatever I like, it's kind of like Callicles' position. Whatever makes me happy is good, and whatever I dislike is bad. But it gets more sophisticated than that.
Then how do they tie that in if you have a god?
Well,
your
you know, everybody's
gods.
a little inconsistent, but the Greeks believed in lots of gods, and the gods didn't always do what is morally correct either. Now, they believed that people should do what's morally correct, that the gods wanted them to be that way, but Socrates points out that the Greek religious system didn't really encourage any sort of moral, you know, strong moral values, because the gods themselves were not moral actors all the time. So, not to mention, there's just a big factor of contradiction. People oftentimes say one thing but do another. They really don't believe what they say, or they only halfway do so. But it was maybe a little bit easier for them because of pantheism to basically not see their religion as having this direct moral force that said this is right, this is wrong. Okay? So yeah, Socrates raises some of the issues that you guys have raised, which is, you know, first don't we have to know who a friend is? What don't we need to defend a friend? Okay, he points this out too, which you guys have already pointed out. And so it's kind of neat how he defines friend, and it's something I also taught my son. You know, what is a real friend? Is somebody who actually shares your values and helps you live them, basically. So he says, no, by God, it isn't. I don't know any more than what I did mean, but I still believe, this is Paulo Marcos, that to benefit one's friends and to harm one's enemies is justice. And then Socrates says, speaking of friends, do you mean those a person believes to be good and useful to him, or those who actually are good and useful, even if he doesn't think they are? And similarly with enemies. And Paulo Marcos says, probably one loves those one considers good and useful and hates those one considers bad and harmful. Socrates, but surely people often make mistakes about this, believing many people to be good and useful when they aren't, making the opposite mistake about enemies. And Paulo Marcos agrees. So we have to examine things more, you know, to determine, and he's pointing out that a lot of times people make friends with folks that are likable and fun and so forth, but it doesn't mean that they're good people or that they're really good for you. And sometimes they can actually lead you into paths that actually are bad for you and make you worse. So that's not a real friend in his view. So again, Paulo Marcos is too simplistic. Okay? All right, so I kind of already said that. I'll put up the next slide. So again, we can't just have a simple rule. Okay? There's more to it than that. And actually, at the end of this, I hope you notice, Socrates doesn't give us any rule. It turns out that there's no rule that always applies. Okay? And that's part of the reason why Socrates continues to insist that you have to have leaders who are wise and judges who are wise, because you have to deal with circumstances. You have to apply your knowledge of justice to people in particular circumstances to figure out what is just in a particular case. There's no hard and fast rules that always apply. All right. Socrates goes on to say, in contradiction to Paulo Marcos again, that a just person would not harm his enemies. Okay, now this is just a statement that he doesn't really back up here with enough reasons, but he says that a just person will always do to others what they truly deserve, and what they truly deserve is to be helped to be good people. So harming your enemies just angers them and inflames them and does not lead them to be more just. Okay? So a truly just person would have to have quite a bit of self-control, and even when dealing with enemies, ask himself, what will make my enemy better? Okay? You can kind of see why some aspects of Platonic thought were attractive to early Christians, because we kind of take a turn here that most people in this time period would not have agreed with, and seems counterintuitive. Okay? It's not quite love your enemies, but it's definitely you should be concerned about every human being even those that are against you or dislike you. And you should be thinking about how to make them better. Okay? So, Paulo Marcos, faced with what sounds like, it's a confusing statement, it sounds sort of pious, you know, oh, a good person would never do such a thing, kind of backs down. And you know that's something that often happens with Socrates. He has a way of causing some people to back down by sort of making them feel ashamed of their position. And I think that's what happens to Paulo Marcos. Okay? He could have definitely argued with this. You know, he could have talked about deterrence, for instance, couldn't he? He could have said, look, you know, if somebody does you harm, the only way to stop them from harming you again is to create some sort of punishment so that there's deterrence. Okay? Now, Socrates isn't totally against punishment, but any punishment that's leveled out has to lead to the benefit of the person, has to reform them if possible somehow. Can't just be just vengeance. Okay? But other people might argue vengeance works because it deters other people from doing the same thing. All right, so we don't get that argument from Paulo Marcos. All right, so, but here we have Thrasymachus. Okay, Thrasymachus, it would seem, is a full sophist. He's smarter, maybe he's more philosophic, let's say, than Keith was or Paulo Marcos. So he's more in the same league as Socrates. And he has a theory. Unlike the other two, they just have rules, but he has more of a theory, okay? He doesn't actually give a total rule. He says, instead, he characterizes justice. And he says, justice is whatever is in the interest of the stronger, okay? What does that mean, really? Justice is whatever is in the interest of the stronger. Who makes the rules according to Thrasymachus?
The one with the biggest stick.
Yes. The person who has the most power or the person who has the most money, which translates into power, right? So for him, justice is just the rules that the powerful lay down for their benefit. That's all it is. So if you want to know about justice and what it's for, you look at who's in charge of the society, and you know that the laws that that country has are made for the benefit of those on the top, the ones who are in control. Okay? They're there to protect their wealth, to protect their interests, and to safeguard what they have, their power. Okay? So it's a very cynical view, okay? And he actually says everybody is actually motivated to do this. Everybody wants to make the rules for everybody else. Okay? But the reason why some rise to the top and others fall to the bottom is just because some have more courage than others. This is very close to Callicles' view in the Gorgias. Okay? There are some people who will back down and or don't have the skill to be able to fight, both with arguments and with force. And so they back down, and they become the led. And the ones who have the more courage and the more skill, they rise to the top, and they're the leaders. Okay? That's a very natural, kind of evolutionary way of looking at the human condition. And very, very cynical. And Socrates has a little harder time with this. I asked the question here, how would he see the democracy? Because at this time, Athens was a democracy. This is something that comes up in the Gorgias as well. How would somebody like Thrasymachus see a democracy? Would he see it as a real democracy? See, that's the thing, is we would look at it and say, it's all those politicians that are really in charge. They've duped the common people into believing that they're in charge, but they're not. They're just being led around and told what to do, and the laws that they pass are actually in the interest of the stronger, who are the politicians. Okay? And the politicians, how do they get there? They're wealthy. Okay? So really, if we look at it, not the superficial rules, but if we look at what's really going on, we see the strong are still in charge, and they're still making the rules according to their interest, which would be why, for instance, maybe Athens went off to so many wars and had this great empire, and, you know, gathered all these slaves and so forth because it benefits the people in power. Okay? So that's no doubt the way he would look at it. All right, so we'll stop with this one and we'll come back next time. But Socrates' response is not straightforward. Okay? And I'm just leave it up here, but I'm not going to get too much into this because it bears more time. But basically, he starts questioning Thrasymachus' view of leadership. Okay? And he gets into this issue of whether those in power really know what they want. Okay? And if they really don't know what they want and what's good for them, then are these people the ones who are leaders really, or should they be leaders? So he starts to tear his ideas apart that way. Okay? But you notice he doesn't really disagree frontally with this idea that the strong make the rules. And, you know, they really do most of the time. People with power often do make the rules according to their interests. Okay? He doesn't directly contradict that, but he does question the whole mentality by asking about, well, what is a true leader? You know, is it really just a person who has a lot of power, a lot of money? Or is there some other thing which should qualify them to be a true leader? That's where he starts to really go off into idealism. Okay? All right, so I will come back to this particular slide. We're actually out of time.